Welcome everyone to the talk on what about cutting and supporting ethical faceting and polishing. We're really excited to talk this evening, this afternoon, wherever you are, about this with two different perspectives because they're working in multiple different areas. And so it's really interesting to hear how each person approaches this. Eric Braunwart and Hewan, Zewdi. Why don't I have you both do a brief introduction? Eric, why don't you begin and introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Eric Braunwart. I'm with Columbia Gem House, and we work with various mines and places around the world, but primarily we're cutters. So we do cutting mostly through our own workshop. We do have some individuals that cut for us, but we've done cutting for a long time, 40 years. So we know quite a bit about it. We do cut quite a variety of different stones. So, Hewan, you're next.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second session the third session for the afternoon. Thank you for being here. Anyways, my name is Hewan Zewdi. I'm the Agari Treasures, sourcing gemstones from Ethiopia, and been supplying to the U.S. market since Ethiopia has been discovering. And mostly I've been doing just bringing rough and trying to find cutters and trying to establish pretty much now in Ethiopia some cutting lapidaries, which is still a challenge to meet that standard of, the world jewelry market is requiring. I've been working on that.
Great, thank you so much. I think I want to talk a little bit about the safety standards, Eric, and what brought you to having a facility where you implemented safety standards. I think you were a leader in safety standards. I've learned a lot about cutting through the years and what it can do, what we want it to do, as far as benefiting people and being, silicosis being a gem that doesn't harm people when it's being produced in gem production. So can you tell us a little bit first about your journey of why this gemstone cutting became kind of a pivotal area for your business and for you?
Sure. Like I said, we've cut for many years, but in about 2006 or maybe 5, in 2002, we set up our protocols for the way we would run our company. In other words, we changed sort of halfway through our lifetime here and said, now we want to document the supply chain, how it comes to pass, and look at how it hopefully, or to try and make it benefit everybody along the way. So we set up those protocols in 2002. In about 2005, I got a call from a reporter I knew in Geneva during the Basel show. Anyway, there had been a bunch of protests there in front of the Basel show about why wasn't the jewelry industry doing anything about cutters who were dying from silicosis. So this reporter called me and said, well, what are you doing about it? And I said, well, I don't even know anything about it. And he said, well, there's a bunch of people protesting here. And I said, well, I guess it could be, but these are little bitty stones. I mean, how much damage could they do? But after the conversation, in our protocols, it said if something like that comes up, we need to research it and look into it. And when we did, we found out it was a significant issue. So we then, because our workshop is set up in China 35 years ago, we actually then went and said, okay, what air quality do we have? And it was better than the government allowable limit. I don't know if it's parts per million or what, but 10 was the allowable limit, whatever that stood for. And we thought, well, it's allowable. We're at 9.3, so we're under the thing, but can we improve it? So we worked to develop a system to eliminate airborne particles and we were able to get it down to about 2. So it made a significant change. So then we started looking into it more, and there are issues at mines, no question about it. But if you just want to talk about how many people die, there's a lot more of them at the cutting industry than there is at the mining industry. I think our estimate from as many as people as we can work with, which is NGOs and things, is our estimate is 2,000 cutters a year. Now, I don't want people to think this is just a third world problem. An American cutter, a very famous American cutter, died from silicosis about 5 years ago because he did not take the precautions necessary either. So it's a non-discriminatory industrial disease. And so we have worked with an NGO out of India and one out of Hong Kong for the last 15 years on the issue to try and help develop systems that can be affordable and practical and usable in different places around the world. So that's how we got involved in the health area of the cutting industry.
So that's really, I know the story about India. I hadn't heard the story about Basel, and that's really interesting. And I'm sure we've made 2,000 people a year is not really headway on how many people are still suffering from silicosis, but I think it's still pretty unknown. I think if people showed up, and there's not a Basel anymore, is there? But if people showed up at Las Vegas and did a protest, I think many people would still be caught completely unaware of this problem so many years later.
Yeah, absolutely.
So GIA has a video out on safety standards. That's, it should be everywhere about what you can do and how you can improve. So I think we also will come back to the value that you've taken a lot of material that otherwise didn't have a home or a space in the facet gem world and made some interesting designer cuts, because I think that that's an area where a lot of designers, a lot of people that may be here really, I know I love and am drawn to a lot of your gems because it's almost, it's just a whole niche that's very important, and designers love it. So let's go back to that. But Hewan, let's talk about what's going on with cutting in Ethiopia. I have an incredible, I just am in love with the opal that I bought from in Tucson and met the cutter there. And maybe, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what that project was, and there's some cutters that came out of that NGO project and learning to cut. So let's hear about your view on cutting and what that means to your company.
So cutting in Ethiopia, it has been a bit a challenge due to the gemstone industry, it's new as well, and lapidary, and the practice has not been there as much, and the government has put up a lot of institution, but the demand and the supply is not meeting because a lot of rough been going out of the country. And that's why most cutters, they didn't get a chance even to be able to establish and cut. That institution is there. So we have few individual private companies are cutting in a small scale, like pretty much mostly opal and some agates and, like chalcedonies, amazonite and stuff. They've been cut, but the demand and supply is not meeting, So I was just there, and I've been looking at a lot of cutters individually. Like you have made some of individual lapidarists who work at home and cut their opal and supply as cut material, and some of also as an organizations, not as many. It's a very few limited lapidaries available. So, and the government is still like getting a licensing of lapidary in Ethiopia. It requires a lot of procedures. It has not been easy. I have looked at it myself. They require environmental safety and they want to know where the waste is gonna go. What are you gonna be setting up? Ventilation, all those things are requirement. That's also decreasing the amount of licensing to be able to open lapidaries in Ethiopia, and it's been a challenge, as well as the cutting standard has not been accepted internationally, like cutting any like locally free forms. They're not taught or learned yet with calibrated stones, which is not, which is as well also taking the cutting business out of the country.
Right.
And that's a lack of institution and training as well. And other than that, I have seen the cutting still needs a lot of support and establishment and training from the experienced countries. Like I myself, I had a challenge, Eric knows, for many years. So finding cutting, cut stones. And this is the first time for me to find in Ethiopia a good cutters who can do, supplying me, cutting my opals and starting with other materials. Like the reason being is, like I said, it's not established as many. There is safety concern, equipment, lack of equipment, lack of knowledge. All those things are been a concern. I mean, and the standard faceting is not available as well. I'm working with 1948 with Sri Lanka. I don't just send my stones to be cut. I've been in this business in 10 years, but I have been looking for really someone I can trust, someone has a good, what do you call it, safety standards. And where I seen few in Sri Lanka in the past two companies, that's how I even met Eric and looking Colombia Jump House. I didn't know there is a companies who meet. I looked them up. That's how I found out about their company as well. The safety standards, the cutting. So I have not been like, I personally take it a personal issue, having the knowledge of the safety concern and the cutting companies overseas and everywhere. So we would like to get something in Ethiopia with, we're working with some women lapidarists who are being trained, but they have the facility and they don't have the machines, all the equipments. They borrow from the government institution, and we would like to set up with meeting standards with safety, number one, like goggles. They don't know all those things, and not to use dry cut with wet, water machines, and like guidance for how to cut with the saws, safeties, all those things requires a lot of work, and that's what I'm working on. I found lapidarists and who really need help, and that's my companies right now working with them to establish a lapidary in Ethiopia.
So it sounds to me like the laws are maybe ahead of where people can meet the laws, if there's already some laws around safety or there's some standards.
There is standards, environmental safety standards. You have to meet that standards to open a lapidary, unless you're like people are sneaking in and just opening their own, just importing. Even to get the equipment, you have to have license. The government had made some kind of restrictions, so not everybody just go open a lapidary.
Right.
You have to meet that safety and environmental standards too. There is a requirement.
So that's great to have the laws, but then how do we get it so that the women and so that more people are able to cut in countries? So to be able to afford to meet the safety standards, you said there's no faceting machine. I think this is, at the beginning stage of the gemstone trade. It sounds like, this is something that we see in other places as well. And so you feel now a way to help the women may not have, they're not talking about cutting emeralds. They've got opals and agates. So that's an area where you can meet them where they are and work with that. So
that's where I am going to work with them, because they're already approved by the government. They have the place. Number one thing they require is a place where you're cutting it. Is in a residential area. There are other people around it. You have to have a certain workshop just to provide for, and a water system and ventilation.
Right.
Those are, so these women are already have a place who are given by the government. It's an association, and then they're being trained as well by the government institution to work on the lapidary. Pretty much is they're encouraging to create lapidaries around the sites where the
Yes.
region is, like the opals, where mostly are going to be in Wello area. And like the emerald and faceting are not available except few people who knows how to facet, and those has to go outside the country.
Right.
So that's where we can meet them, and then we can also train starting like a simple tumbling,
Yeah.
tumbling as a safe method and for low grade materials as well.
I think we're seeing how you can how cutting can benefit the country and how cutting can benefit those in the country of origin for the gemstones. And I think that, Eric, we're talking about safety and we're talking about the baseline, which you're talking about implementing as well. I think, Eric, I'd like to talk with you about when you're cutting at your own facility, you've still found a way to really, really benefit the mining communities. And that's that you're taking material that they couldn't sometimes already sell, and you're making something beautiful out of material that may not be, say, the AAA quality facet grade. And this is, as I was alluding to, I really see so much beauty in a lot of these products because they're unique. The gemstones that aren't, completely calibrated or, cut in brilliant rounds, they are have personality, and designers love using them. But this is a huge benefit as well, using this material. So can you talk about kind of how this niche grew and how your following grew, and also what does that mean, being able to sell that material for the miners? What is that like? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, we know, since we run a couple of mines ourselves, that most mines do not produce all gem quality material. Matter of fact, I don't know any that do. You're lucky if 5% of your production meets that sort of category. So it's usually very hard to make money as a miner if you're only selling 5% of what you dig up. So our goal has always been to buy what's called mine run, which means it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And can we find ways to make interesting products out of the lesser quality materials? That makes it so miners can actually do better because they're not just relying on those few fine gems they get. They at least have cash flow and diesel money and food money coming from stuff that normally they would throw away or that normally would be rejected by other companies. So we are lucky in that the cutting facility we started 35 years ago, and it takes a long time to get there, just is very creative. We are. So we try all sorts of different things. We just tried some new cuts the other day, and my whole staff's going, oh, these are going to be ugly. They're not going to work. Yeah, well, they worked great. Everybody's really excited. But
what cut is that? You have to show us and tell us so we can see.
I would love to show you. I just don't know how to do it here. It's what we call cone cut cabs. They're out of material that, I mean, the cabs are so cool, I could almost cut them out of basalt and people would like them. So if you cut them out of low grade ruby or some of the other materials that you could not facet or do anything with, we sold all of them within a couple of hours when we put them, up on our website. So, so the idea is to try and support us, but at the same time support the miners using things that they would not normally have a market for. They don't necessarily get tons of money for it, but I know one group we just got in, it covered their expenses for the month, and they had never been able to sell that quality to anybody. So for us, it is important because it helps support the entire supply chain. It also gives us some interesting stuff that's not real expensive. If we want to experiment with it, you don't experiment with $10,000 a gram, emerald rough, but you can experiment with $5 a gram stuff. And then as it starts making more money, we can pay more for the rough, and it sort of goes up in that manner.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that it's brought really, I mean, without that niche, I see now in working in Virtue Gem how important it is to sell that, as you call it, mine run. And, you know, I think it kind of ties in with when we're talking about, as we do a lot in Virtue Gem with women and equity, what both of you are saying in finding niches for, you know, Hewan working with the women in cutting and you with working in that mine run. There's a lot of women-owned miners and women-owned mines where they don't have the same material, they don't have the high-grade facet material, and finding a place to sell their gems is really important as well. So that's great. And I love the two different perspectives. Should we only have about 4 more minutes. I don't see any questions, but if we want to open it up to questions, or if there's anything that I didn't touch on that you two want to speak about together.
I just think, you know, we worked with on projects with World Bank in Madagascar to try and help train cutting there. People think it's very simple. Well, how to cut a stone is pretty simple. How to cut a stone that people want to buy becomes much more difficult. How to finance all that material you have to hold in hand until somebody's there to pay cash for it, that's much more difficult. So it's much more complicated. Even when we set up in China in the mid 80s, it was probably 15 years before we could really get it trained to the level that was really effective. So Hewan's taking on, you know, quite a challenge here, but she's doing it at the right level. And that is, no matter what any of the African countries want to ask me, I keep telling them, start with beads. You know, you can cut 10,000 strands of beads and your carrying cost for that rough might be, I don't know, $1,000. You cut 10,000 carats of rubies and your carrying cost is $5 million. You know, learn on stuff that's inexpensive.
That I should read out Monica's question then too, because that's one with beads. How dangerous from a silicosis standpoint is beading or cabochon cutting, as this is a great option for people, especially women in mining communities?
Well, I can answer that because we cut beads. The rule of thumb is 94% of the rough you cut ends up as offcuts and dust. 94%. So in other words, if you're cutting, our rule of thumb is it takes 1 kilo of rough to cut 2 strands of beads. 2 strands of beads weighs, I don't know, let's say 300 carats. 300 carats in grams is 60 grams out of 1,000 grams. That means you have 940 grams of dust. You better to have a good dust control system. That is where you're going to see the greatest level of silicosis, is in bead cutting. So it's the right place to start, but boy, you better start right.
Yeah, that's a lot of dust, and we just have a minute left, but I think that we kind of jumped into a space on cutting where everyone knows what silicosis is, but I'll just do a quick, and you can tell me if I have anything wrong with this, but say you're cutting quartz. Quartz is like a glass, and when you grind that down, it's like tiny pieces of glass going into the atmosphere, going into the ground. If people are doing this in their homes, it can be on the floors. And when you breathe in that dust, it's like pieces of glass going into your lungs, and it makes tiny holes in your lungs, and there's no cure for it. Is that correct, Eric?
That's a pretty simplified but accurate description, yes. In effect, it hardens your lungs, much like black lung disease would for miners, for coal miners. So it's not limited just to the gemstone industry. It's in a lot of industries, but it's a big issue. Yeah.
In general, mining, I guess, is most minerals mining.
Mining is
you
the
can get
same
silicosis in the mining itself, right?
Yep.
Thank you, Hewan. Yep. Yeah. So,
but it's just, I guess, you know, in our industry, we're selling very valuable, treasured, precious things, whether they're $10 or $10 million, they're precious to whoever bought it. So we should treat the production of it in that same way. You don't want to give somebody a precious thing that cost a third person their life in the process.
That I agree. I mean, it's quite and there's always a lot of people who are on the source and the cutting and the processor who, I mean, sacrifices, and that's where I think we should be taking a responsibility as we're bringing our material and consider the other people and the production and concern about their safeties, their health, well-being, their environment and as well.
Great, thank you. Well, we're on the hour. My dogs are barking, so if you guys have anything more you want to say, I'm going to let you continue the conversation for a minute. Or if there's any other questions, they can come through the chat.
Yeah, I think let's see, we're just ending. So I guess what I would say, if people have other questions on this or anything else, Hewan will be at her table, I guess we call it. I think it's in the arena. I don't know, somewhere. And, you'll be able to talk to her and ask questions or me or any of the other people involved for the next hour, I guess. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, we can answer some questions, and if you have anything, what we do at the source, and it just meet us at the lounge. I think it's in the lounge and the booth. Yes.
Are you showing some of the opals, Hewan? Will you be showing those?
Yes, I have brought some new opals, but it's very difficult to take pictures for the opals.
I know. If you have them in person, maybe.
I like
showing a lot of
material as we cutting. We lose a lot of material to keep out to bring us some good materials.
Okay, Eric, do you have bullets? Do you have some bullet?
I don't. What we did was take pictures of a large number of trays, put them on our Dropbox so somebody can be looking on our Dropbox and talking to us as, at the lounge. That was the only way we could figure out how to do it. I think there are bullets in those Dropbox pictures, yeah.
Excellent. All right, great. One last question then, because I think we actually, maybe we have, we started at, I think we have 2 more minutes. So, Hewan, quickly, one thing. So is water an issue? One quick question. Is water an issue to find and have water and cutting in Ethiopia? Is that a hard thing for some of the cutters to find?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the major electricity and water is a major issue pretty much in most of the region, even in the city. Forget about the rural areas where the sites develop. That's the major. Another concern, setting up lapidary shops, power goes out all the time. I remember seeing in Thailand, I seen a machine working like with just manually they step it on the lake and the wheels move. I seen that the first time in Thailand last year and I was impressed and thought about it, but as they did use the dry cut mostly. So that's going to be a major concern in Ethiopia. Even like the say to establish tumbling materials and doing beads, and it's still going to be a challenge. Water goes. I mean, there is no even some of the areas have no pipelines, so those are also a concern. Like when you're establishing, and you need to have a reserve water, let alone to use it to waste. So that's going to be a major issue as well, unless the dam is finished or something,
Yeah, I can only imagine how difficult that is. Eric, one more minute for you. I've heard stories about when you started and dealing with, you had to do a lot of training on child labor and getting all the gem cutting in order in many ways beyond just safety standards. You've come a long way and brought some your cutting facility and probably worked with the Chinese government. So there's a lot there that we didn't even get to in the accomplishments there.
I think for me, because our core is cutting, when we're talking about responsible, careful supply chains. That's not just mining. It's cutting. And then, like Susan, you're a manufacturer, it's manufacturing practices also. So when we talk about ethical gems, to me, I don't like that term particularly. It really is, it's just a different business model. Instead of just looking at the person that you got the direct person you got your raw materials from, it becomes incumbent on you to look at the entire supply chain and see if there are issues that you can help address. And cutting is one of those stages, and it is one that I think gets overlooked quite a bit. So I just keep reminding people of that.
Yeah, well, you've made a lot of progress since people are protesting at Basel, that's for sure. All right, we do get one more question. Hewan, can you use the wastewater while you cut?
I have seen that it fills with a lot of dust, but I think the cupping machine with genies, they have like, most of them, they have like a tray underneath, and where it holds all the dust, the silicone down. And I seen them, they filter the water and they put it back onto another, they put a little container on top, to instead of using a pipe direct to drop water, they just use that one. I've seen them, a guy using that, recycling the water. So water is another precious thing there, yeah, or you have to but mostly is like it has a lot of dust, and it builds up like clay, so they do use it, but they don't have as much. They do use, I seen that one, they recycling the water, filtering it. They keep it for a day or something, it become like clay or cement, and then they take the water out and reuse it.
That's interesting. Okay. All right. Well, great. Thank you, everyone, for this talk. And I always learn new things from both of you, and the great ways that you can incorporate cutting and faceting into being better for everybody, including the cutters. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And good to talk to you both.
Thanks.